about discipleship programs. Are they good? Are they bad? Or are they somewhere in between? But first, before we dive into how discipleships programs work and if they're useful or not, I want to kick it over to Kenny to see what are discipleship programs.
I think a lot of different people might answer that question differently based on who you ask, because there's a lot of different thoughts. But in essence, there are these programs out there where people take time out of their lives, whether that's a few months or longer in some cases, kind of to carve out a moment to go work with a church or an organization, really focus for them to get intentionally discipled. They're going to get mentored or trained in some way. And there's a lot of different formats, there's a lot of different structures, but generally the idea is you're exiting one area of your life to go focus specifically on a season where you're going to get discipled.
Right. I know you've gone through a discipleship program.
Yep.
I know I went through a discipleship program right after high school. Was yours right after high school?
Yep, right out of high school.
Yeah, there you go. When it comes to discipleship programs, I've noticed that most of them fit into 5 different categories of discipleship programs. They're usually paired with some other kind of organization, like a local church might have a formal discipleship program. Yeah. Sometimes a parachurch ministry has a discipleship program. Oftentimes a college can have a discipleship program like we do here at Bethany Global University. We have the Lead Venture Discipleship Program. A lot of summer camps will have discipleship programs that kind of keep their high schoolers or just before college age students over a whole year to help with their summer camp. And there are a few standalone discipleship programs. I'm trying to think of
360 in Tennessee.
That's the only one I could think of, but I know there's more out there. Yeah. So now that we know kind of what the 5 major ones are, what are some common elements, Kenny, of discipleship programs you've seen out there?
The most common element, I think, is the idea of is an intensity of spiritual material. Basically, whatever the Christian normally would get, just ramp it up significantly. It's kind of the idea of the greenhouse effect.
Sure.
When you have a plant, you put it in a greenhouse, and you're protecting it from the elements, and you're controlling the environment, the climate, and you're giving it a lot of sunlight and not a lot of nutrients and a lot of attention to cultivate it, to make sure it's the healthiest it can be, so that when it leaves the greenhouse, it's the strongest it can be. It can reach its potential. And plants that are in the greenhouse are far more likely to reach their potential outside of it. So I think the idea of the intensity of care. I don't think most people who are members of a local church are getting that kind of attention from their pastors usually. Where if you are in a discipleship program, let's say at a church, there's a lot more time being invested, with you from a pastor or a church leader. Yeah. So there's an intensity of attention and focus. They know you way better. They're getting in your business more, so to speak. And then there's just more of an intensity of content. You're reading more books. You're reading more of the Bible. My discipleship program, we were required to read or memorize 400 Bible verses in a year. And 20 years later, I still know a lot of them. Praise the Lord. There was an intensity. Never in my life have I memorized 400 verses in a year at any other point, and probably never will. Realistically. And so I think that's probably the overarching element that I see in a lot of these programs.
Sure. And now that I think about it, I even think about the kind of elements that I often see correlate to the kind of discipleship program it is. If it's in a local church, then you're going to find a lot more local church elements, right? Or it's it hovers around a lot around the Sunday service and how they might serve in that kind of capacity or in some kind of ministry within the local church. If it's in a college, then of course there's probably some more college classes. There might be some credits involved. If it's at a parachurch ministry, then it takes on the flavor of that parachurch ministry, whether it's whether it's missions related or I don't know, focused on some kind of specific cause, then you're probably going to be studying that cause. Or summer camp, then obviously you're going to be in the outdoors a lot.
Yeah.
But of course, I love that there's a lot of emphasis on spiritual growth during that discipleship program. But since you've been through one, would you say it was helpful for you?
I would say my 2 years in the discipleship program, it was a first year and then an optional second year, was the greatest, probably the most formidable 2 years of my life. There were other moments where God did some incredible things in my life, but as I look back, largely my love of the gospel, the man who I am, the leader I am, is majority influenced by that 2 years of my life. So I honestly would think it was awesome.
I'd have to agree. I mean, I also took 2 years in a discipleship program, a different discipleship program, but both of them were actually both youth ministry focused.
Right.
Our two programs. I don't know about you. I'm sure you came at it hungry. I know I came at mine really hungry, and I just sucked it up. It was amazing. But I can't imagine going back. I can't imagine what would happen to Dan or what would happen to myself if I hadn't gone through the discipleship program. And I mean, I'm sure my trajectory would have been still pretty solid, but learning those critical things like how to study the Word, how to be consistent in my quiet times, growing in the knowledge that I did across the Bible, as well as some critical elements like worldview, missions, leadership, are now foundational things that I kind of take for granted now. But when I look back to see like how some peers might be struggling some ways or another, I'm like, oh yeah, I had those foundations laid when I was 19 and 20 at the discipleship program I was. Can you think of anything else, other reasons why it's helpful?
Yeah, I mean, the relationship component, which I know you get at a college setting as well, but the intensity of the programs are frequently structured that the people you go through it with, you have bond. There's a camaraderie that you can't replace. It's hard to, I tell people all the time, like some of my best friends are people I went on mission trips with, but imagine like a 9-month mission trip. Like that's how it felt.
Right.
And so that, but I think the key you mentioned that I would reiterate is the worldview. I think I have a biblical Christian worldview that I think about things critically with the scripture in mind, that the Bible really informs how I think about things. That would not exist without those 2 years of my life. And not that I learned it all in those 2 years, but that set the trajectory for the next 20 years where I'm continually ever growing in biblical worldview. That I think I see so many Christians don't have. And honestly, it breaks my heart. It makes me sad when I see so many Christians don't have it.
Right. So clearly we're a fan of discipleship programs. Yeah. It's evident between the two of us. Would you say there's anything lacking with discipleship programs in general?
Yeah, I don't think they're all created equal. I think I've heard stories. I've heard some horror stories about some discipleship programs. Even some programs that have like multiple locations that are autonomous. So there's a lot of discipleship programs where there's kind of a big mama organization, but there's like subgroups that are run by a local leader or a local church or and sometimes the local group doesn't fulfill the way they ought to. They don't meet the mandate the way that the mama organization or the other organizations might have done well. And so, yeah, that's probably one thing that I think that there's a lacking in terms of, I don't know the word, quality assurance, right? Or accountability to make sure that they're getting. I think that's a major component that seems to be missing in some of the programs that I've heard of or been up close to.
I mean, that kind of makes sense. I mean, college has accreditation to kind of hold it accountable to its mission. Churches sometimes have denominations or some kind of governance, but discipleship programs, depending on what they're plugged into, can be kind of loosey-goosey. It can be really intense. You never know what you're going to get into, so it certainly takes some research to know what that discipleship program is going to be like. Is there anything else you could think of?
Yeah, the other thing that really stands out to me is, and I don't know the solution, but the problem of training people once they leave the bubble. There are so many people that are a part of great discipleship programs, but sometimes you're isolated from real life, for 4 months, 9 months, a year, and you're living life in such a way that makes sense in this bubble, this Christian bubble. And sometimes people leave that bubble and they don't know how to interact in just real life. Everything is overly idealistic or overly optimistic or unrealistic, or it becomes across very judgmental because you're the superstar Christian that you did the program and now you know better, and it comes across very judgmental. And this person may not be judgmental. They're just so excited and they've learned so much and they want to help so much that it's overwhelming. And teaching people how to interact. I think a lot of discipleship programs, they have rules against. They may say you can't do this. They may say alcohol or tobacco or different curfews or movies. There's a lot of different things that discipleship programs implement, and they don't teach people how to go back into the real world and interact with those things in a way that uses wisdom rather than the black and white no or yes. I remember when I first came out of the discipleship program, we were not allowed to watch rated R movies. That was one of the rules. So for 2 years, I hadn't watched a rated R movie. And I praise God for that season. It was helpful. And I remember going to a friend's house and he was watching a war movie. I think it was like Saving Private Ryan or something. Like some war movie that was rated R. And I remember being like, oh, I can't believe this.
Get behind me, Satan.
And I remember it actually fractured some of my friendships, how I reacted. And I'm not blaming the program, but I wish I was better at integrating. How do I integrate my friends who did not have that experience and maybe have a different conviction? Or how do I maybe not be so black and white and realize maybe a movie like that could be appropriate for a Christian? How do I temper that? That took me years to figure out. And I feel like I see that in a lot of people coming out of discipleship programs.
I feel like you were describing me like the whole time. Because that was totally me. I remember even coming out of my discipleship program, going back to my local church, and my pastor actually did something that was pretty radical. He's like, you know what? Everybody in this congregation, you have no excuse to not pray an hour sometime this week. Like a whole hour nonstop. And I was like, an hour? Like just once? you mean like every day? You guys are, what kind of backsliding church is this? I was like, now I'm looking back, I'm like, dude, if I actually, like, when's the last time I've actually prayed an hour straight? But I remember coming at it with that kind of attitude and that kind of like black and white, because the discipleship program was so intense. Mm-hmm. And we were mandated to have like an hour of quiet time every day. So praying for an hour is kind of like, well, yeah. You mean everybody doesn't do this? Yeah.
That's awesome.
I know another way I find discipleship programs to be lacking in that they tend to be just focused on between high school and college, which is so unfortunate, because sometimes you meet someone who probably got saved later on and would just benefit so much from a discipleship program, but you're like, you're 33 now, and well, you're just going to feel out of place with all these 19 and 20-year-olds in this discipleship program. Yeah. So but I don't know how to help my friends, because I'm like, man, you would benefit so much from this, but and it's going to feel like youth camp to you.
It's largely the structures.
Right.
Like, it's not intentionally trying to ostracize the, but it's like so few people from that age group are going to do this program because of life. They cater to the younger demographic. Right. But the program I was in, we actually had a couple guys that were in their 30s and 40s. Not a lot. But the rule was, if you were over 30, you had to kind of go through a special interview process, because they wanted to make sure you were going to fit.
Right.
Because there's a culture. Here at BGU, we actually had a woman who was in her 50s actually came through a discipleship program here that we do. And yeah, I remember her wrestling with it, and it doesn't always make sense. It takes a unique person, but you're right. What if discipleship programs maybe were a little more holistic in how they approach that?
Right. And I also think it comes down to like, it's great that we have discipleship programs. I think they're really worthwhile. At the same time, I'm always thinking about like, how do we build this more into the local church where we can like do this at scale? Because sometimes it's not always practical for someone to leave their home, get plugged into a discipleship program for a year or two. It's just not always practical for everybody, and it's not easy to scale the discipleship model that way. And I know Jesus called, was essentially planting 12 disciples at a time. Paul was planting churches. I wish I'd see the more, what am I trying to say? More intentional discipleship happening in church. Hence the reason for these videos and the whole website and everything, to see more discipleship happen. But overall, I'm trying to think of anything else lacking in discipleship programs. That's about all I have.
I think you're right. There seems to be a disconnect. There does moments where it's easily we could fall into the pitfall to say, you want to be discipled? Do this program. Rather than saying, you want to be discipled? Get involved in the life of the church. You will be discipled.
Right.
And there does seem to be a lack of it. And so maybe the lack of discipleship program, or the problem they face, is that maybe they could, those of us who run them or are part of them, we could do better to reach out to local churches, and vice versa. There could be a symbiotic relationship there. Absolutely. I think that could be that could make them better.
Man, new annual goal 2020. Anyway, and discipleship programs, absolutely worthwhile. I really recommend it. I know Kenny recommends it.
Yeah.